Hello everyone. Human beings have a natural tendency to believe in the law of cause and effect, that good people will eventually be rewarded, and wrongdoers will face the consequences they deserve. That's why stories of revenge in the name of justice always have such a powerful appeal to us. André Bamberger was a French accountant. He once had a beautiful wife and a happy family with 2 children, a boy and a girl. Unfortunately, his first marriage ended in heartbreak when his wife had an affair. It took him a long time to recover from that pain. By 1982, at the age of 44, André's career was thriving and he had found love again. It should have been a fresh start for this man's life, but just as things seemed to be falling into place, something completely unexpected happened. At 11 a.m. on July 10, 1982, the phone in André's house in France suddenly rang. On the other end was Danny, his current wife, sobbing uncontrollably. She gave him devastating news his only daughter, Kalinka, had passed away in her sleep the night before. The news shattered André. Just a few days earlier, he had seen Kalinka, off to Germany to spend the summer at his ex-wife's home. Kalinka was a healthy, sporty, cheerful girl. Her sudden death was both shocking and suspicious to him. Without hesitation, André packed his bags and set off for Germany. Kalinka died on the night of July 9th, while sleeping in her bed. The first person to discover her lifeless body was her stepfather, Dieter. According to his account, around 7:30 p.m. that evening, as he usually did, he gave Kalinka an injection of a compound containing iron and calcium to help improve her skin and treat anemia. After that, he told her to go to bed early. A few hours later, noticing the light in her room was still on, Dieter checked in on her again. Kalinka mentioned she had a bit of a headache and asked him for a sleeping pill. Thinking nothing of it, he gave her the medication and returned to his room. The next morning, when he went in to wake Kalinka, he found her unresponsive and not breathing. In a panic, he tried chest compressions and gave her an emergency cardiac injection, but it was no use. Kalinka was gone forever. Dieter was a well-known cardiologist in Germany. Although he and André had been on tense terms for many years due to Danny's affair, he had been living with Danny and the 2 children for the past 7 years. Over time, Kalinka had gradually grown closer to her stepfather. This wasn't the first time she had received iron supplements. Her dosage had always been carefully monitored. According to Dieter and a few other physicians, it was likely that Kalinka had suffered from heat stroke or a cardiac issue after spending too much time in the swimming pool on an extremely hot day. Her death was classified as a medical accident, and her body was examined in Germany before being returned to France for burial. Just like that, a young girl in the prime of her life was gone, leaving behind immense grief and an irreplaceable void for her family. But for André, the situation felt far more complicated. When he saw his daughter lying motionless in the coffin, André felt like the world had stopped. He couldn't accept that the vibrant, full-of-life girl he had just sent off a few days earlier was now reduced to a cold, lifeless body. Standing at her grave, he lost all sense of time and place. The world around him blurred into a haze of heartbreak and disbelief. After the funeral ended, he couldn't even remember how he made his way out of the cemetery. 3 months after Kalinka's death, following repeated requests, André finally received a copy of the autopsy report. The entire document was written in German. He immediately found someone to translate it into French. As he read through the report, André came across several deeply troubling details. First, the estimated time of death was around 3 a.m. on July 10th, with the cause of death listed as undetermined. Second, in the hours leading up to her death, Kalinka had been injected with an unidentified substance, but the autopsy team could not determine what it was. Third, around 4 to 5 hours after she died, that is, the following morning, she was given another injection, this time a cardiac stimulant. But the most shocking detail appeared at the very end of the report. Kalinka's genital area showed signs of a fresh tear, along with traces of blood. Inside, there was a thick white fluid with a strange odor. However, the report made no mention of testing this substance, nor did it explain why it was there. In fact, there was no definitive conclusion on what drug had been administered or what caused her death. The report also floated several vague possibilities such as congenital heart disease, trauma from childhood injuries, or even drug use on Kalinka's part, but none of these theories were backed by any concrete evidence. Andrei couldn't believe what he was reading. He wasn't a doctor, but even he could tell that Kalinka had likely had sexual intercourse before her death, and that her passing might not have been a tragic accident after all. Shocked and outraged, Andrei immediately traveled to Germany in search of answers. He quickly located the forensic doctor who had performed the autopsy, but the response he received was chilling. The fluid sample found in Kalinka's body had not been preserved. No tests had ever been conducted to determine what it was. The case had already been closed. There was no way to reopen the investigation. With a growing sense that something was terribly wrong, Andrei decided to launch his own investigation. He asked questions everywhere he could and eventually uncovered a crucial piece of information. During the autopsy, Dieter Kalinka's stepfather had been present at the scene, involved in the process as a party connected to the case. More than that, Dieter had been the only person with Kalinka on the night she died. He had injected her with medication without any doctor's prescription. When she didn't wake up, he administered a cardiac stimulant hours after she had already passed. And most disturbingly, he was present during the autopsy, a presence that was not only unnecessary, but completely inappropriate. The questions kept piling up. Why would an experienced doctor like Dieter behave this way? Was he trying to save her, or was he covering something up? A terrifying possibility began to take shape in Andrei's mind. Kalinka didn't die from natural causes. She may have been sexually assaulted by Dieter and then silenced to ensure the truth never came out. Consumed by suspicion, Andrei confronted Dieter directly. But the man calmly denied everything, acting genuinely surprised by the accusations. Andrei's ex-wife also refused to believe it, dismissing the idea as a terrible misunderstanding. But Dieter was no ordinary man. He had once worked for the German Foreign Ministry and maintained strong connections within the local political and medical communities. Andrei, on the other hand, was just a French accountant, utterly alone in a foreign country, with no support, and no one to back him up. He went to the police, demanding that the case be reopened, but they refused. He turned to the prosecutor's office, requesting a re-examination of the remaining samples from the autopsy, but that too was rejected. Out of options, Andrei began distributing flyers on the streets, calling for public attention, hoping to put pressure on the authorities. But shortly after, he was arrested, charged with defamation. Not only had he failed to reopen the investigation, Andrei now faced another devastating blow. He was ordered to pay damages to the very man he believed had killed his daughter. The German legal system dismissed all attempts to revisit the case, slamming the door of justice in the face of a father screaming in desperation. Realizing he would never find justice in Germany, Andrei returned to France. But instead of giving up, he made a decision to wage a long and grueling battle. He poured all his money and time into hiring the best lawyers, specialists in cross-border criminal cases to reinvestigate Kalinka's death. However, the investigation was riddled with obstacles. German authorities refused to release the samples from the original autopsy, making it impossible to verify the cause of death. Andrei came to a painful realization. If he wanted new evidence, he would have to go out and find it himself. By 1985, after more than 2 years of being blocked at every turn, he made an agonizing decision to exhume his daughter's body for a second autopsy. But when the new forensic team began their examination, they made a horrifying discovery. Kalinka's entire genital area had been removed. Andrei trembled as he looked at his daughter's mutilated body. This only deepened his suspicions. There was no way she had died of natural causes. Andrei immediately contacted the officials responsible for the first autopsy and demanded that they provide the missing organs. The response he received was almost unbelievable. The removed tissue had been accidentally misplaced. That was the final straw. Andrei knew then that this wasn't just a careless mistake. There was no doubt left in his mind. The truth about his daughter's death had been buried from the very beginning. Speechless with rage, Andrei began reaching out to various organizations and used his legal team to apply mounting pressure. Faced with undeniable errors and mounting scrutiny, the forensic authorities finally relented. They agreed to release a few remaining tissue samples from the original autopsy. By this point, it was already 1988, 6 years after Kalinka's death. After examining the remaining tissue samples, the forensic team became nearly certain that Kalinka had died due to food from her stomach regurgitating into her windpipe, causing her to suffocate. This could only have happened if she had fallen into a deep coma, and it was clear that this condition was linked to the injection Dieter had given her. However, because so much time had passed, the remaining samples weren't sufficient to identify exactly what drug had been used. Still, if it could be proven that Kalinka's death was connected to the injection Dieter administered, the case could finally move forward. After years of relentless struggle, André finally saw a glimmer of hope. He brought all the evidence to the Paris Criminal Court. In 1995, the court finally opened the trial. Based on the available evidence, the court found Dieter guilty of intentional bodily harm leading to involuntary manslaughter and sentenced him to 15 years in prison. After all the hardship, André had finally secured a legal judgment in his favor, though it still didn't feel like complete justice. The problem now was that Dieter hadn't attended the trial. To enforce the sentence, France would need to request his extradition. However, Germany was highly reluctant to extradite its citizens, especially someone with deep political ties like Dieter. Even though France issued an international arrest warrant, Germany repeatedly refused the request, citing concerns that French prison conditions did not meet human rights standards. What made the situation even more outrageous was that, because the trial in France had been conducted in Dieter's absence, he was never given the opportunity to defend himself. On that basis, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that France had violated the defendant's rights and ordered the French government to compensate Dieter with 10,000 francs. What had started as a father's pursuit of justice for his murdered daughter had now escalated into a complicated diplomatic standoff between two nations. The grieving father, who had already lost his child, was now caught in a seemingly endless legal battle to bring her suspected killer to justice. Just when the case seemed to be reaching a conclusion, it once again collapsed into deadlock. Then, in 1997, after years of chasing justice, André suddenly received shocking news. Dieter had been arrested in Germany, accused of sexually abusing an underage patient in his own clinic. As soon as he heard, André rushed to attend the trial, hoping that this would finally be the chance to expose the truth about his daughter's death. According to the plaintiff's testimony, Dieter told the girl that iron deficiency could lead to several negative symptoms in the body, and that it also affected the skin, making it impossible for it to look healthy. Based on his diagnosis, he recommended an iron supplement injection as treatment. With his gentle demeanor and reputation as a respected doctor, Dieter quickly gained the girl's full trust, and she agreed to the procedure. However, right after being injected, the girl quickly began to lose consciousness. Perhaps due to her unique physical response, she didn't completely black out. Before everything turned hazy, she caught a terrifying glimpse. Dieter was completely naked and on top of her. From the victim's account, it was clear that the sequence of events mirrored exactly what had happened to Kalinka, from the suggestion of an iron injection to the loss of consciousness and ultimately the sexual assault. Even more shocking was what followed the trial. Several other victims came forward, claiming they had experienced the exact same thing with Dieter. He was a serial offender. And finally, André understood the full truth about what had happened to his daughter. For the first time in over a decade, he had a living victim's testimony that confirmed what he had long suspected. Dieter had targeted Kalinka, using his role as both a doctor and a stepfather to deceive her into receiving a sedative injection. Then he carried out the assault. But the tragedy didn't end there. During the attack, possibly due to the violent trauma and the unbearable pain, Kalinka reacted by vomiting. The food in her stomach regurgitated into her windpipe, and she suffocated to death. Even more horrifying was that Dieter knew she was dead, but he acted as though nothing had happened. The next morning, he even injected a heart stimulant into her lifeless body, likely in an attempt to confuse the results of the autopsy. He then used his connections to be present during the forensic examination, manipulating the process to cover up and destroy any remaining evidence. However, due to a lack of solid evidence and the plaintiff being in a confused mental state at the time, Dieter was only stripped of his medical license in Germany and received a suspended 2-year prison sentence. Watching the man who had murdered his daughter walk free, Andrei couldn't take it anymore. He quit his job, shut down his company, and devoted the rest of his life to seeking justice for his child. He sold his home, poured all his assets into hiring lawyers, and even began studying law himself to fight to the very end. He handed out flyers on the streets, wrote letters to the justice ministers of France and Germany, and reached out to influential politicians hoping to put pressure on both governments to force Dieter to face the consequences of his crime. Since 1982, to avoid Andrei's relentless pursuit, Dieter had moved house more than a dozen times. But no matter where he tried to hide, Andrei always managed to find him, like a ghost that refused to let go. By 1998, 16 years had passed since Kalinka's death. Andrei's ex-wife believed he had become too obsessed and no longer wanted to be involved in the case. His new girlfriend left him for the same reason. The French authorities were reluctant to take strong action, fearing diplomatic fallout, while Germany kept coming up with excuses to avoid extraditing Dieter. Time dragged on, but the case remained stuck in limbo. If nothing changed, by 2012 the statute of limitations for Kalinka's case would expire. At that point, Dieter wouldn't just be a free man, he could even turn around and sue Andrei for harassment. On the night of October 17, 2009, police in Mulhouse, France received an emergency call. The caller reported that an international fugitive had been tied up in the middle of the street. Police rushed to the scene and found a man tightly bound to a fence, his face covered in blood. As they moved in closer, they realized it was Dieter, the man who had evaded justice for years. It didn't take long for the police to discover who was behind it. They raided a nearby hotel and arrested Andrei. He was sitting in his room, strangely calm, as if everything had gone exactly according to plan. His bags were packed. He sat there waiting quietly for the police to come. After countless failed attempts to obtain an extradition order, and with the statute of limitations rapidly approaching, Andrei made a bold, desperate decision. He paid $20,000 to hire a group of criminals to knock Dieter unconscious, smuggle him across the German border, and bring him to France. He was willing to commit a crime himself if that was what it took to carry out the sentence that the French justice system had failed to enforce for decades. After 27 relentless years of fighting, Andrei finally succeeded through extreme means in bringing his daughter's killer back to France to face justice. The capture of Dieter and the arrest of Andrei sent shockwaves through French society. The story of a father who spent his life tracking down a murderer, selling everything and sacrificing all in pursuit of justice for his daughter, captured the attention of the media and the public alike. This time, it was Germany demanding that France release Dieter and extradite the men who had kidnapped him. But France refused. On March 28, 2011, the Paris court officially reopened the case, honoring the previous ruling, and ordered Dieter to be imprisoned. After nearly 30 years, Dieter was finally locked behind bars in France. Andrei's trial followed shortly after. Charged with kidnapping, he faced up to 15 years in prison. But the court acknowledged that his actions had been driven by a desperate pursuit of justice. In the end, the jury delivered a sentence of 1 year suspended. When he walked out of the courthouse, Andrei was 74 years old. The once tidy and disciplined accountant was now aged and weary. And as he heard the court sentence Dieter at last, he couldn't hold back his tears. Someone asked him, "You spent 30 years of your life just to get 15 years in prison for the killer. Was it worth it?" He replied, "As long as I found justice for my daughter, it was all worth it." In 2012, Andrei returned to Kalinka's grave. He gently whispered to her headstone, "I kept my promise." In his final years, he lived quietly in the outskirts of Toulouse, near where Kalinka rested. After dedicating half a lifetime to seeking justice, Andrei finally found peace. Andrei Bamberger's story isn't just about the pursuit of justice, it's a testament to the power of unconditional love. He spent his entire life chasing a truth that the legal system had turned its back on. Sometimes, justice doesn't come on its own. It belongs to those who are brave enough to chase it until the end. And though the price was a lifetime of sacrifice, Andrei proved that truth can be buried, but it can never be erased. What do you think about this case? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below.